recently, the United States government's representative from Missouri, I believe his name is Todd Atkins, and his supporters have advanced the notion that if pregnancy results from forced violence, aka rape, the crime may not have been a quote-unquote legitimate rape. In Atkins' view, women who are victims of legitimate rape rarely, according to Mr. Atkins, and he would know, get pregnant. He learned from doctors that if it's a legitimate rape, the female's body has ways to try to shut the whole thing down. This is according to Mr. Atkins. Representative Atkins really could not be more wrong, of course, but no doctor is necessary for us to show that a rapist can indeed impregnate his or, in these days, her victim. All we really need to do is look into the history of Black America. And when you compare the way the original Black African looked and look at the way Black people in America look, well, you will get the results of what history reveals. Since 1949, the systematic rape of a people has been considered a war crime by the Geneva Convention, a form of genocide euthanized as ethnic cleansing. But the application when it comes to indigenous people and enslaved Africans has been prominent throughout our nearly 500 years worth of history. The Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria may have carried Christopher Columbus in his voyage to discover America, but he and his crew were also enslavers and murderers and rapists. A crew member wrote in his diary on the first record of rape in North America. Now listen to what he wrote. He wrote that while I was in a boat, I captured a very beautiful, darker complected Carib Indian, which all of them were darker complected. I had a desire to take pleasure from her, but she did not want it. I took a rope and I thrashed her well, for which she raised unheard of screams that you could not have even believed with your ears. In other words, he's raping this Black woman now. Columbus helped the Portuguese initiate the slave trade on the islands of the coast of Africa, now this is how they began the slave trade, with the systematic rape of African women. Then they took their mixed race offspring and trained them in schools in the business of slavery. In fact, it was these half Europeans that were the so-called Africans that white people are referring to, that claim that that Africans sold us in the slave trade. Just think about that, brothers and sisters, as we talk about the hate. I'm talking about the hater, but he has produced hatred in us for one another. Englishman John Gabriel Stedman, a so-called Jew, traveled in the 18th century to Suriname and wrote that the enslaved Black African woman must yield to the loathsome embraces of an adulterous, licentious manager, or see her husband cut to pieces. Well, you've seen that with Halle Berry on the TV screen. Monsters Ball. This is their history. We're talking about the hater. Closer to home, rape was explicitly used in the plantation system to create a light-skinned buffer zone to control the pure Africans. These race mulattoes became the house slaves and were trained to keep the darker Africans in check and compliant with the aims of the slave owner. You can read this in the Irritated Genius book, War on the Horizon, How to Escape the White Sex Assault, but you can also get it frequently in the Final Call newspaper. Now, in the state of Louisiana, where Louis Ali and other people from the Hot Black Coffee Party reside, whites actually, in their legal documentation, had legal categories to reflect the result of generational rape of African women. The African people, now referred to as black, were actually called mulattoes and Creoles. And if the Negroes had a quarter or 1/8 African blood, they were called octoroons and quadroons, respectively. They were sold at the greatest profit to brothels to feed the insatiable lust of white elites who preferred them to white women. Now, I want you to just take a minute of your time, and we already opened up in prayer, and as you prepare for evolution and revolution, it's most important that you just take a minute and think about a man who hates you so much until he will attack an African nation for the sole purpose of whitening up the race. In other words, what they call today ethnic cleansing. And he will make another species of human being for the sole purpose of satisfying his lust to rape women. Just think about that. Because I'm going to go somewhere before the show is over with, because many of us don't know why we are so messed up as a people, but it's genetic, spiritual, and even physical, but we only concentrate on the physical and never look at the genetic makeup that cuts deep, 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 deep down into us to make us so filled with hatred and treachery toward one another. Now, there was a Jewish rabbi, his name was Harold Schaffman, that wrote that Frenchmen were whitening up black females for sexual purposes. And by selectively breeding them, according to this rabbi, they had produced a more exotic slave. Tall woman, small hands and feet. In 1786, America's soon to be president. Now you think about this for just a minute. I want you to just think with me. George Washington enslaved 216 black Africans, 92 of them children. This unusually high number of children who were able to work on his plantations indicates that George was heavily into breeding. And it was our brother Irritated Genie that highlighted and put up high for us as a benchmark that the biggest business on the plantation was not picking cotton. That's a business, but that wasn't the biggest business. The biggest business on the plantation was breeding humans the same way you breed cows and pigs today. They were breeding humans, and they were acting as studs and also bringing in studs to make different types of slaves. In fact, some years ago, me and my father were talking about there was a book with the different species of slaves. there was actually a species of slave called the coon. And there was a management book, like you give out a little manual on how to operate a car or operate a washing machine. There was a manual on how to manage the mulatto, manage the coon, manage the buck, manage the Negro on the plantation. And this is why this is one of the most important conversations that we could have about white supremacy. And I got to calm down because it's just so demonic that the domestic trade was the largest cash crop that was on the plantation. We're talking about the hate that hate produced. Now, anytime a man will breed you, sister, and breed you, brother, that's some serious hate. I want you to think of President Thomas Jefferson, who famously molested a 14-year-old black girl. Some say she was even younger. Forced her to have 6 mulatto children with him. And that family is divided to this day. Black men cited this widespread sexual terrorism by white men as one of the prime motivations for fleeing the South in the Great Migration northward in the early 1900s. Callers, please be patient. We'll come to you shortly. You don't hear anything about this, but W.E.B. Du Bois, a man who we have learned that was a bright supremacist, but he was so pained by it, in a chapter of his book, Dark Waters, he titled it, The Damnation of Women, Black Women. W.E.B. Du Bois said of the white South, he said, and this is probably why he wound up in Africa, because he started coming to his sense at the end, but he'd been quite a bright supremacist all the days of his life, but by the end, he just couldn't take it no more. I guess the black came out of it. Look at what W.E.B. Du Bois said. He said, one thing I shall never forgive, neither in this world nor the world that is to come, is the wanton and continual and persistent insulting and rape of black women, which is sought and seeked for prostitution to its lust. And enraged, W.E.B. Du Bois further in the Crisis magazine said, let black men especially kill white invaders who enter their homes and take their daughters. Let them lynch them gladly like men. It's worth it. When the white NAACP officials visited Athens, Georgia in 1903, a committee of blacks sought its help to address their greatest danger. Listen to this, brothers and sisters. Would you believe that in 1903, the greatest danger that black people told the NAACP about was not segregated schools or water fountains or even police brutality? And you can imagine what Bubba was doing in 1903. Look at what they said. They told them that the greatest danger was the undergrads of the University of Georgia who stalked black females so much so that no Negro girl 12 years old and under